This is easier. Yeah. Yeah.
So those of you who are joining us and listening to our nonsensical banter, if you want to chime in, you can use the question and answer box. So if you want to tell us, maybe you don't have a fully formed poem yet, but you'd like to tell us about some of your experiences in nature, please do so in the question and answer. Someone is asking, does it have to rhyme? Deanna, does it have to rhyme?
No. Nope. Whatever it is that you'd like. A poem, it's from your mind, from your heart. It doesn't have to rhyme. Unless you want it to rhyme, then make it rhyme. It's up to you. Yeah. Oh man, pigeons. I feel like I could talk about pigeons for hours. I had, so before I worked at the Design Museum, one of the other museums I worked at was a science museum. And one of my fellow educators there was very, very into pigeons. Like because of the way apparently they have so many chromosomes to help you know what the pigeon's going to look like, right? So like every animal has a certain number of chromosomes. This is for everyone, not just you, Kelly. And like, for example, there are some dog breeds that have more than others, and it'll change the way that their coats are colored and everything. And apparently pigeons have just this humongous number of chromosomes and then a humongous number of like coloring possibilities. And he was so into it. And every time we would kind of be walking somewhere or walking in or out of a school and there'd be a pigeon, he'd stop and like take photos and then try to figure out which of the combinations it was.
Not only do I think pigeons are just such amazing creatures, it does not surprise me, because one of the things that I love so much about pigeons is like people say that they're ugly, but like just like with snails, when you look closely at them, like the iridescence and their plumage is so beautiful. And then there's like every once in a while you catch like a spotted pigeon or baby pigeons are also quite
adorable. I think baby pigeons are ugly.
Oh,
that's the only. Because it just
when have you seen
the long beak with the thing on the top and
Have you seen a baby pigeon in person?
Yeah.
Whoa.
I used to, when I was a kid, I used to a weird guy, so I used to like feed me and my family used to like pop popcorn for the pigeons.
So cool.
We used to, because there was a garage, because I lived in a triple decker, and we lived on the second floor in one of the apartments where we lived, and there was a garage next to like where like our back porch was, and I used to also throw bread out on the top of the garage to feed the pigeons.
Yeah. Millet. We used to feed them a lot of millet. And like
which is probably healthier than Wonder Bread for pigeons.
Yeah, it's probably. But yeah, we used to have them. They would like land on your hand and stuff. And we had the funniest thing. They were like, it was like a community of pigeons. They would come like every day to get fed and whatnot. And you put your hand on the window, they would jump on your head and get the peanuts off your hand or whatever it is. But they would have this competition. Of course, the males had to compete for we had a pigeon we called the King of the Banister, because it was the king of the banister. No pigeon could knock him off the banister. They would try, they would fail. There was a pigeon called Red Feet. He had a little wifey, and I forget her name was Fluffy, because she was just the fluffiest, cutest little pigeon. There was a lot of different pigeons, but I think Red Feet and Fluffy were our favorite pigeon couple. There was baby pigeons there was one time there was a baby pigeon that wasn't very smart. It got eaten by a hawk. There was a lot of pigeons.
Pigeons, they just have such character, personality. I'm glad we all agree on this point.
They do. They have
I feel like the webinar is over at this
point. Welcome to our webinar on pigeons. This is what we do.
Pigeon 101, how to design the perfect bird. Yes. All the chromosomes.
Yes.
We are at the top of the hour right now. We would like to welcome you to the Future of Construction webinar series. My name is Kellyanne Mahoney, and I'm a youth program specialist at Autodesk. I'm excited today about our topics. Our topic today is designing for justice. So we're going to be getting into the specific design challenges that you are being encouraged to participate in. We're going to talk even today about the opportunity to showcase your work that is going to be curated by a real museum. So today we are joined by Jemuel Stephenson. who is an industrial designer, digital fabricator, who specializes in laser cutting as well. And he's actually he's situated within Fabrite Origins, which is the design studio that he founded. And he's going to be even giving us a sneak peek of his space. Jem also is collaborating with the Digital Ready program. So he is going to be one of the work-based learning coordinators for Digital Ready. So he'll talk about that a little bit. And he's going to be presenting one of the design challenges today. So we are so excited to have Jem here with us. We are also joined today by Deanna Navarrete-Rakakis. She is she is the Director of Learning and Interpretation for the Design Museum. She is also an instructional designer, an excellent maker educator and design educator. And she is going to be sharing another of the design challenges with us today. And she's also leading our warm-up activity as well. So we are so happy you're here. We encourage you to continue to participate through using the question and answer box. As we were talking nonsense about pigeons for a while, we actually got a poem. So I'll read one of the poems. So liking when biking at the mountains, seeing a beautiful fountainful fish, vibing with the trees, climbing on trees, then seeing bees flying, walking while talking to animals, having fun seeing the sunrise while eating a bun. So I am so impressed by the talent that we have cultivated here through this webinar series. So thank you for that. Deanna, do you want to talk just a little bit more about the warm-up activity so that we can let students know what we are responding to?
Absolutely. So today, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is environmental justice. It's one of our topics. And so just to kind of get us thinking about that, what I'd love for everyone to take some time to do is to either write a 3-line poem, no rhyming necessary, or draw a picture about an experience that you had with nature in your own neighborhood that was important to you. So keep it local, keep it something close to you, something that happened near where you live.
And that is why we were talking about pigeons.
Yes. That's how we ended up on Pigeon Watch.
And you don't have to contribute your whole beautiful poem into the question and answer, but if you just want to talk to us even about, I know that some of you are in Boston. I think the majority of you are in Boston, but I know that we are joined by particularly students from the ACE Mentor program from throughout the country. So I feel like people who are in Boston can talk at length about things that are in Boston, but very interested in hearing about parts of nature that are important to you in other parts of the country as well. Someone said they love it when sunlight streams. So sunlight streams pooling on the sidewalk. So very beautiful use of language there as well. It's a really nice image.
Very evocative. Immediately I saw exactly that moment.
Mm-hmm. And then like particular trees, like I like birch trees, how the light streams through their leaves. It kind of like sparkles.
I've always been a big fan of the sound of like willow, the way that they kind of wrestle against each other when it's breezy.
Yeah, so it doesn't just need to be visual senses, it could be your sense of sound and how nature appeals to you. Someone asked, does it have to be in our neighborhood or could it be somewhere we've been?
I'm gonna say to try to keep it to your neighborhood, because I think that's what we're gonna be talking a lot about today, is how to talk about nature and justice in our own spaces.
Someone noted the Boston Common as being extremely important, particularly because there are very few parks in some neighborhoods in Boston. And you can see the Boston Common is on the right-hand side. Is that the public garden? I always get confused which is the public garden and which is the common, even though I grew up here. I always think it was like one big thing.
I think that's technically the garden.
Another poem, no concrete here. I can walk through a wooden bridge and there's only green around me. Back at my home, we are so deprived of the beautiful nature that makes us alive. So impressed with what I'm seeing so far. Skyscrapers, construction, drilling, and buzzing in New York City. but tangled within all the concrete, there is the soft piece of greenery, flowers, bushes, trees, and endless, endless amounts of parks.
Y'all are good.
Yeah, I know. I'm impressed. And I'm looking forward to seeing how your creativity is also going to be manifested in thinking about designing for the built environment. Someone asked if you're in the right place for Super Teens. You are in the right place. So we're also joined by the Super Teens camp, which is the BCYF camp in Boston. So welcome, welcome. We're happy you're here.
And Kellyanne, how much longer do folks have to kind of finish up their poems and keep working on their sketches?
Say the next 30 seconds or so. Maybe while I will just introduce the topic again, introduce us, and then we'll get started. Deanna will get into the official program. So
Awesome.
if you're joining us, you are here for the Future of Construction webinar series. We are so glad you're here. My name is Kellyanne Mahoney, and I am a youth program specialist at Autodesk. We are joined today by Jemuel Stephenson, who is an industrial designer, digital fabricator, and who specializes in laser cutting. He is the founder of Fabrite Origins in Dorchester. He is the founder of the brand Da Vinci, and he's also leading some work-based learning programming for Digital Ready, who is one of the partners of our Future of Construction program. We're also joined by Deanna Navarrete-Rakakis, and she is an instructional designer, design educator. She's the director of learning and interpretation for the Design Museum. Both Jem and Deanna are also going to be talking about just other opportunities within their organizations to engage with young people as well. So I am going to leave it to Deanna and Jem from here on in. So I'm just happy to be here and excited to learn from you today as we talk about the future of construction.
Awesome. All right, so I'll start us off here. So wonderful introduction, but here it is again. Here's my name, here's my title, and Design Museum Everywhere. But what I am really interested in talking about is our first challenge of the 2 design challenges that you'll be able to tackle with your immense creativity during your time with us. So the first challenge is going to be create a model that shows how you would address an issue of environmental justice in your neighborhood or community. And this is why I wanted you to think specifically about where you were in your neighborhood. So you're going to eventually explain how your design solves this problem through images, words, numbers, a 3D digital model, and or physical model. And we'll talk a lot more about that tomorrow when we go over the design process and the way that submission is going to work for when you do finally have these awesome ideas, how you're going to get them to us so that we can display them on the website. But today we're going to be talking all about environmental justice and how that affects our neighborhood and our community. And before we get to that, I did want to just say, the reason that I'm here and that I'm talking about this as from Design Museum Everywhere is 2 main reasons. One, we're going to be hosting all of your awesome designs. So when you submit them, and I'll tell you how to do that a little later, we will have them online for anyone to see so that you can share them with all of your friends and family and kind of really show all of the different creative problem solving that you'll be doing together throughout your time with us. And the other reason is because Design Museum has, I guess let's back up a little. For those of you who have never been to Design Museum or who don't know what Design Museum Everywhere is, we are a museum that has no building. We don't have a building of our own at all. So what we do is we create programs and exhibitions that go into communities all around Boston and Portland and San Francisco or across the country. And so we have a set of 12 what we call impact areas. And these are things that matter to us, things that help us kind of categorize the different types of design that we see. And when we're talking about environmental justice, there are a lot of overlap between environmental justice and these 12 kind of important impact areas for us. So for example, vibrant cities, right? Environmental justice has a lot to do with the way that we see our cities being vibrant and lively and safe and happy and healthy for everyone. Other one's healthcare. So when people have clean or access to green spaces, they're happier and healthier. So that's something we'll be talking about. Play, and I'll give you an example of that in a second, right? When you have spaces, we were seeing in some of our poems this morning or this afternoon, we were seeing folks say, maybe where I come from, I don't really have, like my neighborhood doesn't really have that many green spaces. And so maybe I don't really have spaces to play freely. And so that's another issue of environmental justice, talking about sustainability, right? So we think about how we can save our environment and make sure that it's here for us and that we are both taking care of it so it can take care of us. So there are a lot of ways, so civic innovation being the last here. So how it is that we can work together to create new ideas and bring them to the forefront. So there are all these different ways that environmental justice matters to Design Museum. And so we're really excited to be able to partner and talk about and see all of your amazing ideas for how we can creatively problem solve some issues around environmental justice. So this is a PlayCubes setup in Chinatown down in downtown Boston. How many of you can answer in the Q&A, how many of you have either been to this area or seen this playground? I'm just gonna wait while we have some answers for you. Yeah. All right, so
you
Jen,
can also raise your hand.
up.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah,
and
so
as we're
Kellyanne,
raising our hands, can I read someone else's poem, Deanna?
Oh, yes, please.
Walking through Boston, fresh air and sunlight, a beautiful concrete jungle.
I love that. Fresh air and sunlight, a beautiful concrete jungle.
Right, so I'm looking at participants. So 8 participants have raised their hand.
Okay, so a couple of you, and Jem is one of them as well. So this was a project that Design Museum, when we started an exhibition all about play and designing for like fun and risky play for different ages, we were able to work with PlayCubes, and we were able to, in that partnership, bring this playground to this area, which is part of the Greenway in downtown Boston there. And it's one of the ways that we were able to bring a play space that didn't exist in the area. There was no space for kind of student, like young kids to play. It's a lot of concrete. It's a very busy space. There's a lot of cars and roads, and it's just right next to South Station. There's so much going on, and there wasn't kind of a nearby playground. And so we were able to bring a playground that works in the concrete space that was already there. And that's one way that we were able to kind of merge these ideas of play and environmental justice, and making sure that people have access to outside play areas. So here you see some of the kids in the area playing, and it was originally only supposed to be up, I think, for a couple of months. I think maybe 3 to 6 months was the original agreement. And when we were at the point where it was time to start thinking about how we were going to take the playground down, all of the residents of the area, the community in the area, were like, no, we like this. Like, we need this. This is fun for us. This is fun for our kids. Like, can we just keep it? And the city kept it, which is great. So that's one way that Design Museum has been working on these issues. But back on track with environmental justice. So before we kind of even get to the idea of environmental justice, I'd love to see some ideas about what we think justice means. So how would you define justice?
And you can type that to us in the question and answer box.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see. Equality, doing the right thing, doing what's right for the environment when we're talking about environmental justice. What is right for the most people, correcting something that's wrong. Okay, wait for a couple more answers. Fairness and equality for all, equal for all people. Amazing. And then I have a request to read one more poem, which I definitely will.
There's always time for poetry, Deanna.
Yeah, exactly. There's always time for poetry. I agree. So we have, the breeze goes through the trees. The flowers are gold, but old. It is beautiful and plentiful. And that's wonderful. I love that image. So yeah, we have, on the topic of justice, fixing mistakes, providing equal amounts of well-being, being safe for what's safe for people, and I'm seeing a lot of ethically correct answers, correction for mistakes, responsibility and taking care of each other and the environment. And that is spot on. So when we talk about environmental justice believes that everyone, regardless of their identities, so no matter who you are, where you live, anything about you. You're entitled to both equal protection from harm, for environmental harms and risks, and something that is too long to put here, and also you are entitled to enjoy your environment, right? So both protected from things that are harmful and also allowed and made as easy as possible for you to actually enjoy the environment around you. And that does not currently happen for everyone. And so there are lots of ways to go ahead and create environmental justice situations and create design interventions that will help create environmental justice for all people. And there are a couple of kind of major principles for environmental justice. And this is coming from the EPA website. You can see at the bottom corner there. So if you're ever interested in learning more about environmental justice and kind of how it is that you can approach environmental justice, that's a great place to start. So people should always have an opportunity to participate in decisions about activities that may affect their environment and health, which, spot on, right? It should always be about the community and the neighborhood that you're living in, and everyone should have an ability to say, hey, I really need green space. There are no trees in my area. Like, there's nothing here. What can we do about that? The public's contribution can influence the regulatory agency's decision. So when we're talking about, publicly planting trees, I'm going to keep using this example. We, as residents of our neighborhood, don't go ahead and plant trees in sidewalks or in medians or anything like that. That's being handled by different regulatory agencies, different parts of local governments or state governments, depending where it is. And what we want in our neighborhoods, and in terms of kind of what it is that we're looking for, should matter. It should influence what folks are doing in that space. The other is that community concerns will be considered in the decision-making process. And I think you're all seeing the trend here, right? That it's about how the community and the space are interacting. So it's very important that the folks are being asked what it is that they need, what are their issues, and community concerns should always be part of the design process. And finally, decision makers will seek out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected. And that is the trick. As designers, it's important that when we are trying to create something or design an intervention of some sort, or design a solution, creative problem solve, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're speaking to the right people, that we're speaking to people who are going to be involved. It's not enough for us to say, oh, we are going to be sitting over here, and if you're interested, come talk to us for an hour, and that's it. Like, no, it's our job to make sure that we're going out there, talking to people, finding who's going to be invested in this and who's going to be affected by it, and making sure that we're getting their input. And you will talk a lot more about that tomorrow when we talk about the design process and how we can actually go about creating these design interventions and these solutions. But for now, environmental justice, exactly what y'all said. It's making sure that everyone has access to their environment and that their environment is safe and healthy. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different parts of Boston and how they look really, really different. So these two spaces are actually not very far from each other. One is within the other. They're both images of downtown Boston. And the image on the right you see has this long, let me see if I can get my pointer going. Hey, there we go. Has this long, I don't want to give it away. Does anyone know what this is called? Let's see. Any ideas? What part of Boston this is? Kellyanne, if you can check for me while I'm pointing.
People are saying no. While you're pointing, okay. I can read some more poems, though. Would that be okay, Deanna?
Yeah, please, more poems all the time.
The children are playing, grass is dancing, above is the sun gleaming bright. Beautiful. And then one more, walking through the neighborhood, looking at the sunset with a yellow reddish sunset, so thoughtful you could cry. And now we are guessing government center. So that was beautiful. Thank you all for your creativity. Government center, someone said, is it Milk Street? Green Space Financial District. Is there a movie theater near there? And then Somerset Rotary.
Yeah, so I love that so many of you are recognizing the buildings and the built environment. That's really cool. And this the reason I didn't want to say it is because I always describe it as this like green stripe, this greenway, because it's the greenway here in Boston. And so what it is, it's a set of kind of green spaces that are built into downtown. And so some parts of downtown are very green and have a lot of free green space to play in and to have activities in, a lot of tree coverage, and others are very concrete based. So not a lot of built environment, not a lot of green space there. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit, just to give an example of an issue around environmental justice, is heat and the way that heat, especially now in the summer, I think we're all experiencing it, is how heat changes depending on what part of the city you live in and what your neighborhood is. So any ideas on kind of what types of neighborhoods, so what landscapes will get much hotter than others? Let's see if we can.
We have someone joining us from Texas.
Ooh, welcome.
Hot spaces there. Welcome.
So let's see. What type of spaces are warmer or hotter in the summer than others? So a lot of cities with a lot of buildings. So for example, Manhattan. Government Center attracts a lot of heat, Copley Plaza. Full concrete streets with low buildings, absolutely. We're talking about mostly concrete urban areas, things with lower landscapes, for sure, right? So because there's a lot of concrete, the way that the heat is absorbed, it makes the spaces really, really warm. And so one way to kind of an environmental justice kind of design way to help combat that heat is to add more green spaces and add more trees. It helps cool the ground, it helps create shade, it helps create just happy green spaces. And so I have two apologetically blurry photos, and this is from an open tree map. So opentreemap.org is an awesome place that you can go and search for any major city, and and it'll have these maps that show you. On the left, we have the green trees, so things that are planted. It'll tell you the type of tree it is and where it's planted. And then on the right, what you have are empty planted spaces. So spaces that should have been for planting that have not had a tree put in them yet. So we'll see that sometimes, right, when we're walking down our sidewalks and maybe a tree got sick or whatever it was, it got taken down, and there's still now just like an empty dirt hole where maybe we could put a tree back in. So you'll be able to see both on opentreemap.org. And as you can see that there are some parts of Boston, and I'm using Boston, that's just because I'm based, but for all of you who are here nationally, please feel free to check OpenTreeMap or even just kind of think about what your community and your cities, your nearby cities and suburbs look like, is that a lot of the trees the tree planting is concentrated in certain areas, which means that there's a lot of areas that don't have that kind of environmental intervention to create a difference in the heat in the summer or at any time of the year where it gets a little warm. And there is a very cool project that was actually done by the Museum of Science, which I love what museums do things in the community. And they partnered with a couple of other researchers to create heat maps. So this is a heat map, again, of kind of the Boston area. You can see on the right a temperature gauge, so you see how hot these places are. And you'll notice that the places that have these lighter yellow colors also have a lot of green space in them, right? So if you flip back and forth to these, you'll see those spaces that are missing these green spaces that don't have the kind of environmental coverage there are very concrete heavy, right? Very low, very high buildings and things that make the space really, really warm. And so I'd love to hear some ideas in the kind of Q&A section of some things that we can do to bring more green space to these very, very hot areas. So I see, plants are cooling. A living wall, very cool. Living walls are very, very interesting. Green roofs, a great addition as well. Someone's saying even just like, what about designing pools? So places so that people can cool off. So even if their space isn't exactly as cool as it needs to be, at least they have a way to cool themselves in a way that's easy. Split streets with tree space in the middle. So building medians right into our streets. Vertical gardens, right? So going right up the walls, like why wait for the roof when you have the entire building side, right? Absolutely. Shades, yeah, right? Green architecture, green roofs, decks, and walls. So in San Antonio, would the Riverwalk be a green space? That's a really great question. I luckily have been there. I think that, I think that it counts as a green space. And it's also another kind of big issue that we talk about here in Boston, but also all over the country, is access to water spaces. So if you live somewhere where there's a river or you're on the coast, how easy is it for you to publicly and easily and freely, right, access that water space? So the Riverwalk would be a good example of giving people free access to water spaces. Someone's talking here about overhead trees. So yeah, why not we're thinking here of living walls, right? And then someone said, okay, that's like a spatial decision, right? Something that we can do to make the space different. But what about a system decision, right? So make city requirements that they have to add 50% living walls on all buildings. When you're thinking about design, it can be objects, it can be spaces, right? And it can also be, how do you combine those to create a system that works for people? Absolutely. So water fountains, yeah, right? Lots of water ideas. Garden homes, absolutely. So these are the kinds of things, these are the kinds of ideas that we would like you to explore as you start thinking about what you're going to design. And when it is time for you to, you've done your process, you come tomorrow, you learn all about the design process, you hear what's going to happen, you hear about creating constraints for yourself and how you can best do your research and create prototypes and learn, work with some Tinkercad stuff. And then you'll actually do your design. And once you do, you're going to want to submit it to us. And so to do that, you're going to go to designmuseumeverywhere.org/future of construction. And you have until August 14th, which is just about a month from now, to do all of your awesome design work and submit it to us. You'll see there'll be a submission form. It's not there yet because we're not done talking to you about how to do it, but it'll be up probably by next week. And anytime between next week and August 14th, you can submit our designs, and your designs rather, and we will display them on our website as kind of a digital gallery of all of your awesome ideas. And I believe that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Deanna. I'm also noticing, so some students have other competing projects that they're working on right now during the summer, so we can be flexible, I think, with the timeline and working with your programs as well. But let's try to make the August 14th deadline in our minds to get this submitted. And I'm so excited that your work is going to be showcased by a real museum, and it's a design museum. That's so cool.
Really fun.
Yes. And then someone asked about LEED as well, LEED points. I do believe Polly from the Boston Society for Architecture is here as well. So maybe later on after we hear from Jem from Digital Ready and FabRite Origins, we'll all stick around for questions and answers as well. But I want to make sure we have time to introduce Jem. So Jem, take it away.
Howdy everybody, how's everyone doing? Again, as Kellyanne mentioned, my name is Jamil Stevenson. I'm an industrial designer here in Boston, Massachusetts, and been working with Digital Ready for a little bit, working with their program. And I also have a design brand myself, doing really interesting laser cut designs and things like that. And first of all, I think that was a really great presentation. Took a lot of notes on it. And I want to talk a little bit about, first, a little bit, what we do, a little bit about my story and stuff like that, and then how I sort of learn how to design things in the way that I do it, and some interesting kind of quick tips and things like that that people can use to actually create fun things quickly. So right now I am at my shop here in Upham's Corner. This is a space I've had for about a year now, and if you look on the wall, there's a lot of kind of cool artwork. Now this artwork we're actually going to take and we're going to laser cut it and turn it to all sorts of very interesting products and things. I'm actually coming downstairs here to show you a little bit about some of the products and things that I develop right now. And this round of design, we're doing a lot of packaging and boxes and things like that, because we do a lot of collaboration with a lot of cool companies and stuff like that. You can sort of see this is one of our designs. It's a twist lock top. You can sort of see here. You can see how it closes and opens. And that goes on here. And this is, all these things are laser cut. Now, when we're actually thinking about designing, of course, there are a few things that you have to think about. You have to think about the product, what you want it to do. You have to think about the physical form of the product that it's going to take. You have to think about the materials. You have to think about a lot of things. And typically, my design work takes me into working with, I do a lot of design work in a lot of community centers, pre-coronavirus, obviously, where I've pretty much grown up for the past like 10, 15 years, doing pretty much on the spot design work for people. And in order to do that, you have to be able to quickly identify, a problem, identify a solution, identify the tools that you have at your disposal to actually solve that problem, and then go ahead and do it efficiently and quickly. I'm going to show you, I think I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen in just a couple of seconds here.
While you do that, Jim, I saw someone has a question here about what company of laser cutting machines do you use?
Oh, what company? So I actually work a lot with Epilog. Epilog's been the thing that I've used for a while. I've worked with Epilog. I've worked with some Trotec a little bit. Those are both really good laser cutters. I've also worked with some more mediocre laser cutters. I work with Boss Laser. I work with a couple of others at different maker spaces and community centers around, work in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. I've worked pretty closely. I started actually working at the South End Technology Center in, I think it's in the South End, Boston, Massachusetts. And I also, I've worked with these lasers. First, I started with like the mini, like the small one. Right now, I use like a Fusion M2, which is it's like a 75-watt laser cutter. Can cut some fairly large things. And I think the great thing about it is that, as opposed to a lot of other forms of digital fabrication, you can actually process a lot of different kinds of materials and fairly quickly. Part of the design strategy that I use is I really like to iterate very quickly. I like to iterate designs because a lot of times, if you're thinking about something, why not have it in front of you, and then say, okay, well, that sucked. Let me go ahead and fix it really quickly. Oh, that's much better. All right, this is what I want to go with. Now let's change the material and do it for real. Let me show you actually an example of, this is one of the things that's actually been cut up and turned into, this is a box we've designed. This it's all laser cut, and this is some artwork that someone did. Has a little magnetic
closing method on there. You can sort of, if you look really closely, you can sort of see there's a little magnet that's been installed inside this thing when inside the lid, which actually lets it close and open in kind of a satisfying kind of way, which is kind of cool. But another thing, the thing I want to talk about is, so when you're actually designing some stuff, actually, let me show you, before I even do it, let me just go ahead and share my screen with you. Let's go ahead and share the whole screen. So this is some of the stuff that, some of the things that we're working on right now, actually designing and creating. I think, can you guys see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So my design strategy, one of the things that I do is it's mostly about how much can you laser cut? How much of the part can actually be made within the same manufacturing method, especially if that manufacturing method is one of the quickest manufacturing methods. So pretty much all these things I'm going to go through right here, this is all laser cut. This is like a briefcase of some sort. And the whole thing can pretty much, you can just go ahead and print it. You print your briefcase, go assemble it. Now you have it, which allows you.
Did you create this in?
So this program, I actually created this in Fusion 360 and Inkscape. So I teach a lot of, I teach Inkscape design, like 2D modeling design based in Inkscape, because it's free and it's open source. So it's a lot easier. The barrier for entry is a lot lower than something that you might have to pay for, especially since I work in a lot of community spaces, where, someone just shows up and they might not be completely invested until they come and they say, oh my goodness, this is something I can do. And that sort of provides them with the opportunity to start designing and creating right away. There's some more things. This is like stuff for buttons. Let me see if I can escape this here. I can show you a couple more cool things. This is actually kind of fun. Go ahead and I render it in Fusion 360. This right here is a tip jar of sorts. There's a little sliding mechanism inside here that allows this the bottom half to basically slide in and out. You can also see how there have been magnets installed there to make it snap to and open and close really nicely.
Jem, someone asked a question about when would you 3D print something versus when would you laser cut it? Could you speak just a little bit to like why you would use a laser cutter? You talked about it a little bit, but like in what instances, which tool would be best?
Absolutely. That's a great, very good question. So I think it depends on a couple of things. It depends on the type of shape that you're making. Physically, what is it? If something is there's certain, been doing with 3D printing, one of the beauties of it is that you can create and fabricate pretty much any physical shape, like anything, except for like suspended things that aren't connected to anything, but pretty much anything you can actually fabricate as far as geometrically wise. One of the issues that I have with traditional 3D printing is that you're a couple of things. First of all, your material is limited as far as what you can do. It's an additive manufacturing tool, which basically means that you start with nothing, like just a regular blank build plate, and this machine will go ahead and add material where it sees fit. In order to do that, you need to have the material that it's working with has to have certain properties that would be consistent. Because of that, you're limited, and most 3D printers, especially that are more available to the average consumer, are based in plastic, which is cool, but it's not as, let's say, sustainable as something like wood, which I like to use partially for that reason. I would use laser cutting if I have material already that I would like to process to turn into something. That's not like just a real spool of filament. Because of that, a laser cutter can process wood, can process papers. It can also process plastics, it can process fabrics, you can process most organic materials. There's certain things that are a little bit that you don't want to process with it, just because you are burning things and there are fumes and stuff like that that are emitted from the process. But in general,
it has a little bit more of a lot more, I think, of a diversity of materials that you can actually process. That's part of the reason I like using it. Also, second reason is it's much quicker. You saw the box that I showed you. If I tried to 3D print this on a hold on a second. If I tried to print this on a laser cutter, on a 3D printer, it might take me several hours to do. But on a laser cutter, this might take 5-6 minutes to laser cut, which as a business owner, that's a little bit nicer for me when I'm thinking about being able to produce things to actually sell to make money off of, or for someone else to be able to make money off of. And part of the things that we're trying to do is trying to teach people how they can use these tools to actually generate income for themselves, designers to actually, hey, you can add this to your workflow to actually produce things that you can actually produce and generate revenue from and actually manufacture. Does that answer the question? I hope so, right?
It totally did. And also just thinking about like when we're using materials, what might be the best tool to use in order to minimize waste as well, both 3D printing and laser cutting. Great tools.
That's another good question. I'd say that they're both, I think laser cutting it has some waste associated with it, I think, but not that much. 3D printing, you have some waste, but maybe not as much because of you're talking about, you have the support material that you might have to remove. But a laser cutter, generally since you're cutting out of an existing piece, there is probably going to be scrap material left over. You try to minimize your scrap material by, designing strategically. And, but, you will generate some. But also the scrap material is a little bit different because it's, it's wood, or it might not be wood, it might be something else, but sometimes you can repurpose it as well.
So also we have a question. So CNC machines we also have in the tech center at Autodesk and are increasingly being used to think about like new methods of construction. Could you say a little bit about the difference between a CNC machine and a laser cutter?
Yes. So CNC machine, to be honest with you, laser cutting and CNC machining is a subtractive manufacturing process, which again, you start with something, you remove some material. With the laser, you're removing just that tiny, the laser width, the beams width of material. With the CNC machine, you are essentially taking an end mill, which is sort of like a drill bit for those who are not super familiar, and you're basically routing or just basically removing, it spins really fast and you start to remove material from whatever sheet of material or block of material that you've placed until you arrive at the final part. It's very similar in operation to a laser cutter. One of the benefits to a CNC machine is that you can carve a lot better with a laser cutter. You can carve some things with laser because the way the laser cutter works, it can adjust the beam strength as it's moving along very, very quickly to sort of give you a contoured look. But the CNC machine is much more precise with that, and you can process a lot more. You can remove a lot more material a lot faster. Disadvantages of the CNC machine, though. Also, CNC machine, you can process some different materials, like metals. You can process them better and differently than a laser cutter. Although there are like plasma cutters, which are similar to lasers, that do also process metals. But with the CNC machine, one of the disadvantages is if you're building, like the fingers, sort of like box joints, things like the things that I do, is you have a wider width. Like you're dealing with an end mill that might be, let's say, 1/8 of an inch in diameter. This corner, I'll show you an example. So this corner right here, this inside corner here is going to have a little bit. It won't be exactly square, just because you're essentially dealing with it's a round. You're almost like drawing with a round marker, and this inside corner, you're not going to get that exact corner. There are ways to get her to work around that, and there are very, very small bits that you can use to get very close to that.
I think they're both really, really great machines and really, really good. You can process, again, faster than the 3D printer with both of these machines. The 3D printing is, just because it's an added manufacturing tool, it takes a little bit longer, but you can do different types of shapes.
And Jem, we appreciate all of your expertise on thinking about different machines and what type of tool would be the best tool to use in order to make a design or to build a design. Some of the students are confused because they said that, like, are we, you know, are we expected to actually like use a CNC machine or a laser cutter in order to participate in the challenge? No, the idea is you're going to be designing a prototype. But it is always good to think about it, particularly because we're framing this within the future of construction. When you're making a design tomorrow, Deanna is going to talk to you a little bit about criteria and constraints. So in the future of construction, there is this convergence between design and make. So like, why are we talking about manufacturing when we're talking about construction? Well, there's a lot of convergence between the two industries. Similarly, when you're designing and thinking about making a prototype for your design, even though you might not actually be building it right now, you do want to think about what is the right tool in the future you might use in order to build it, and, you know, all types of questions about like, what materials might I use? So we'll get into some of your questions about materials later as well. But I just want to let Jem continue with his presentation.
Sure. No, yeah, I think that, thank you, by the way. I think that that's great. It's a good question. I think that as I've been designing, so as I've been, you know, throughout my career, I've sort of seen that the better that you can get to designing for manufacture, the easier, the more efficient your projects will end up being. If you, there are times sometimes when, you know, someone might design, architect might design something that's really beautiful, but that if you're actually going to build that, either this can be extremely expensive because the types of reinforcements that you're going to have to make to actually make that work, or maybe it won't work at all, or, you know, there's could be some other things. So if you're thinking about it from the aspect of, hey, okay, this is going to have to actually be made someday, which again is the point of being able to, is part of the point to being able to design, because your things you shouldn't be thinking about it just to stay on the computer. Yes, it might in this case, because you guys are developing portfolios or things like that. It might, I don't know. But ultimately, you want to be able to design things that can actually be made, because then you can actually start a business. You can actually make things that can make you money, because people can actually physically say, hey, I have this thing that someone made, and hey, it's good quality, you know? But yeah, I just want to talk about a little bit of design technique that I might use. What we're going to do is, and by the way, how much time do we have? We have probably about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I would say like if you could do the 5 minutes for the demo, and just make sure that we get to the talking about the activist architecture design challenge.
Absolutely. So I think that part of the designing with activist architecture, if I'm going to try to make something, let's say that, let me see. I kind of want to, okay, so I'm going to do like just a brief demo of just sort of like the design process that I might use to design something. And we'll probably decorate it with something that, we can try to decorate it with something that's related. This is Inkscape. It's a very, 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 very nice program. One of the things that when you're designing, I'm actually going to make just something extremely simple, just a cube of some sort, or a box of some sort that I might use. I'm actually delete that one right there. We're going to design something. Now, when I'm talking about designing for manufacture, with my laser cutter, right? I'm going to design something this thing might be able to be made, on a laser, and I'm going to give it some definite size, right? When I talk about like thinking about a couple of things that you might need to know, you need to know what you're making, and then what you're making it from, of course. In this case, let's say if I have a material that's a certain thickness, let's say like a 1/4 inch thick or something like that, I'm going to need to know how this piece is going to interact with all the other pieces that make it up. So in this case, I have a 1/4 inch. Let's say that my material that I'm using
in that case, is a 1/4 inch thick of something like that. I can duplicate these pieces, by the way, right here. We're going to space them out pretty evenly. I'm going to group them together. We'll put them on the surface here of this. I'm going to change the color just so we can sort of see what's going on here. And this should take no more, this should take like a minute or so just to sort of sketch this out here. And the thing about, when you're thinking about actually designing things that might be made on the laser cutter or on any sort of manufacturing, using any sort of manufacturing technique, you got to think, well, I have physical material. In this case, I have something that's a 1/4 inch. Now, if I said I want my piece to be some definite size, let's say 4 inches by 4 inches, I'm going to have something where part of my, I'll show you right here. You can sort of see how this side right here is a little bit different than this side, and this side kind of overlaps this side, which means I need to remove some material from this side and that side so that they all come to the proper dimension. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to delete, remove like a point, like 2 times the thickness of my material from 2 of these sides, from all sides here. I'm going to add it back to one side here, make this back to 4 inches. And now if I take this and this and duplicate it here, let me move this here. Let's bring this up here, object. I don't know what happened to my thing. Well, actually, what happened to my thing? Well, you know what happened? Here we go. We're gonna put that right there. And now if I just take this, we're gonna change the color on this just so we can all see what's going on. I have most of my designs just right there. If I wanted to go ahead and delete and take this, duplicate that again, put it here. Now you can sort of see that I have pretty much the makings of one of the most simple shapes that we can use to actually manufacture. I can send this design, well, most of it, to my laser cutter, and it will produce something that actually works. I can then go ahead and duplicate this. Now I have 6 sides. I can send this almost, because I'll have to do something. We don't have a whole lot of time here, but I could easily merge all these pieces together with this, and then now I have something that I can use. Box is one of the most simple kind of design things, but you can use that to make a lot of different types of shapes. This is an example of taking a 2D, like taking my 3D idea. I want something that's physically in 3 dimensions. I'm going to take it, I'm going to break it down into its most finite components and bring it into a 2D version, in a 2D space, design it for my machine, and then make it so that we can actually replicate it again and assemble it into 3 dimensions again. And that I can make time and time and time again very quickly.
Yeah, someone just quickly, because it makes sense in terms of what you're talking about, asked about your 2D into 3D, like your workflow into Fusion. Why would you use Fusion 360 as part of your workflow?
A very good question. So Fusion 360 is very good for rendering. So imagine if, let's say you don't have all the material on hand, and let's say I want to be able to still, let's say, to make a mock-up of something. Imagine something is an expensive project, or a large project, complex project. You want to be able to know that the money that when you go to actually cut it or manufacture it, that the money that you're spending on that material is actually going to making a fully designed project. So I use a lot of Fusion 360 so that I can make really cool mock-ups for either my clients, for myself, and test. I might do a test fit of this design, bring it into Fusion 360, extrude my my vector, and then begin to actually assemble all of my shapes like I've done here. You know, you might assemble all these shapes, and then you can actually manipulate it. And because this is actually a render in Fusion. Does that answer the question?
Yep, thank you. And we're going to talk a little about rendering tomorrow. And
Perfect.
someone is asking, can we use Inkscape as part of our design process? We are not prescribing any type of software that you need to use in order to submit your work, but I will be demonstrating Tinkercad tomorrow as well. So that's another way that you can show your idea. So for your model.
Absolutely. And there are similarities between Inkscape and Tinkercad and some of the way that design works in both those programs. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. Are there any other questions that you have for me?
They're more logistical kind of questions. I feel like if we could, because there's 5 minutes left, maybe if you could talk a little bit, and then we can stick around for question and answer as well, but if you could talk a little bit about the Activist Architecture Design Challenge, and maybe even talk about how you're working with Digital Ready students on that project.
Yes. So one of the things that we've been working with Digital Ready is just sort of helping to provide some design change, some design training, some design and technical support for Digital Ready as it relates to some of the summer studio program that we're helping to facilitate here in Boston. And also we have one in-house student that's been working with us that we've been working to develop interesting workflows, design workflows, so that we can actually manufacture cool products as well. And so teaching how to use different machines in cool and interesting ways. One of the things that we have been doing is figuring out how to take artworks, design works, things like that, and bring them into the digital space, and then use that to export to different types of machines, like laser cutters, like vinyl cutters, in interesting ways, and incorporate those into various artistic workflows. Yeah, that's pretty much how we've been working with Digital Ready in the past, since the beginning of this month, I'd say.
In the Activist Architecture Challenge, so what are some ways that you know of in terms of how Digital Ready students are being prepared for that? Because we wanted to include that as one of the challenges that students could do. So one is the address an issue of environmental justice through design, but also just thinking about architecture and even what we learned about yesterday in architecture and applying that to a social justice issue. Do you have any inspiration for students in that regard, Jem?
Sure. So, I mean, I think some of the things that we've been talking about have been, when you're thinking about, like, how does the architecture in your community, how does the architecture serve communities? What does it mean? How does it impact if we put this type of building, this type of park, this type of whatever structure, here or there? How does that impact the communities, and how can we actually design these things to be inclusive, to really help to represent the people who live in the areas that they are, and to include and to provide spaces for community, spaces for that also showcase the history, the cultural aspects of a lot of the communities that you have. How do you take, what does I'd say, like, what does a building that's inspired in this way, have, that has a lot more of, I'd say, hold on one second. But I think it's more about, like, how does the architecture in a space sort of impact, how does it impact the community, and how do you actually design how do you design architecture around the community that's there to help support it? That's what I'd say.
Awesome. Thank you, Jem. And I would encourage also other presenters, even Polly, if you're there, if you want to put on your video, because I feel like we can also, there's some other questions for Jem. I think Jem completely blew our minds with some of the stuff he was showing us. So Jem, also, did you want to, I can read it, or if you want to read it, Jem, the design challenge. Oh, that's Deanna who's sharing her screen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Sorry. I just wanted to pull it up for folks who wanted to see both of them side by side. I think as we saw through kind of Jem's conversation and what I was talking about is that these things can work together totally. So the idea of social justice through architecture and the idea of environmental justice using architecture as a way to do that, you can do them together. So I just want to pull up both of these for folks who enjoy reading kind of challenges, just so that they have a moment to see them written out as well.
Thank you, Deanna.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you.
Oh, so there's Polly.
What? No, that's fine. I'll say, activist architecture, look up the definition of activist and think about how, instead of places and spaces just being passive, how can they be actively designed, and to have people engage with each other, to maybe challenge structures that are in place. So it's very open-ended in terms of how you can think about your designs and what you want them to do. How can they be, as I said, instead of like passive receptors of activity, how can they maybe encourage specific activity, whether it's people gathering or people doing communal activities together. Maybe it's activists in that it changes the system, could change a transportation system or a park system. Can it really be maybe interventionist in trying to solve some of the challenges that we're facing? So I think it really enables you all to think really aggressively in some ways about what design can do.
Sure. Like how do you help art these places help bring different communities together that might not be together? Sometimes you have places that are designed and that don't, different communities are sort of designed kind of apart. How do you design them so that it helps to foster interaction between this place and that place, and for accessibility, how do you design transportation systems? How do you design a lot of just the, white walking places, bike paths, things like that, and places along the way in these spots that helps people really come together. And also, I'd say, really helps that represents the people that are there. There's a whole lot of, there's a large wealth of art and design in a lot of communities that is not necessarily represented, that if it was brought out, like it would blow so many people's minds, and it would be like just really amazing. How do you tap into those things and those places to help showcase that and incorporate that? Because there's a lot there that that can be explored.
I think also like history of a neighborhood, or maybe people, fixtures or figures in a neighborhood, so kind of the human element of a neighborhood, and how some of how the history of a neighborhood and the people in a neighborhood could be better reflected in some of the monuments in our neighborhood, or just the use of space is another way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. A lot of open space usage as well. There are a lot of places that are developing just nice community spaces, small parks, things like that, in areas that people might not necessarily think of putting something, that really helps to foster, green spaces that we're talking about today. Green spaces really help to foster a lot of, relaxation, de-stressing of places. And like, how does that affect, just the general overall health of a community, things like that.
And I think, one example of activist architecture, which was maybe not a perfect example because it was implemented by the New York City Department of Transportation and the Parks Department, so it was a government agency, but when they blocked off Broadway, right? Broadway is huge street that goes through the middle of Boston, and it's blocked off, and it's seating and yoga classes and farmers markets, and people can sell things. And I mean, that's not the use that it was designed for, but it reflects the way people now use the city or want to use the city. It's just a completely different way of thinking about what a street can be. So it's pretty activist to block off a street and take the traffic away completely and make them all go around.
And someone asked the question, are we designing for both environmental and social justice? We wanted to provide you, I mean, you kind of are either way, but we just wanted to give you kind of a couple of options to think about, because if you're designing for social justice, you are, interacting with the environment probably in doing so, and also designing for environmental justice, we're talking about social justice issues too, and structures that are in place that, prevent, even people from having equal access to the waterfront. Like, why does the Neponset River, run through so many neighborhoods in Boston, but, why isn't there a river walk, that we can, have easy access to the river in all places? So those are some questions. And it's also tomorrow, Deanna is going to talk a little bit about the design thinking process and how research is part of the design thinking process. So these are also just kind of good keywords for you to maybe search and think about what are some examples of activist architecture that might be inspirational to you. I also wanted to just make sure while we have everyone here that we address all the questions that people are asking.
I was just going to say the San Antonio person, creating the Riverwalk was actually activist architecture. There was the Riverwalk is actually sunk, the river, sunk below the rest of the city. Was never there before. So that's pretty activist to take over, to create some open space in the middle of the city along the river.
And I'm really fascinated to learn from you all. I know that not everyone is in Boston to hear about issues that are important to you. Someone said, if I design a park, can I decide where it should exist and place it in that place? I would say yes. It's about reimagining spaces and also empowering young people to rethink those spaces as well. Someone asked, this is a little bit off topic from activist architecture, but I know that my mind was blown by watching Jem when he was working in Inkscape in thinking about being able to translate something that's 3D into 2D so quickly. And someone asked the question, is there a way to boost your 3D spatial understanding? How do you do it, Jem?
I'd say that one of the things that I did when I first started doing this is I would look at things and not think of them as what's the purpose of them. Yes, you will think about that, but what physically is it? If I looked at a chair, okay, what is it? Look at a building, physically, what is it? Okay, break it down into its most basic, fundamental, three-dimensional shapes. If you can do that, then the second step that you're going to do is you're going to identify those shapes, what they are, identify how they work together. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to find out what are the different interactions between them. Design those interactions, then you can actually add whatever complexity that you want on top of that to make your design as extravagant, as different, as whatever, as you want it to be. But you'll know fundamentally that it's going to be sound because you know that it was designed from a very basic, very rudimentary standpoint. And then, practice. Okay, if I have a hinge, how do I make a hinge? How do I make a 3D hinge in a 2D space? Okay, how do I make a latch in a 2D space? How do you make pretty much any kind of geometry? Once you can understand that, then it's just a plug and play situation, to be honest with you.
Someone said on a call yesterday that Deanna and Polly and I were on about Pilates for your mind. It seems as though Jem has done a lot of that. And in thinking about like when we talked about the future of construction and the way that teams are going to be reorganized and how there will be these like innovation and integration specialist, that sort of way that GEM is thinking. Traditionally, when we think of someone who's like a construction project manager, we might think that they're narrowly focused on this one thing, but this ability to kind of think in multi-dimensions and to have that spatial understanding is going to be something that's a key skill for the future.
I would say that that just practicing designing, because the first time when I went to design, let's say some sort of box or something like that, it takes a long time. You have to really think about it. Oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. But once you get good at it, I mean, I could design one of probably 90 seconds or 60 seconds or something like that, and you can add pretty much whatever you want to it. I think one of the big things is just really trying to practice, and don't be afraid to mess up, and also think about how you're actually going to be fabricating it. Even if you don't have a fabrication machine, on hand, think about how is it going to be actually made, and then go and see if you can do it. There are also a lot of fab labs and stuff like that all over the place nowadays. When I was growing up, there might have been 4 when we started doing this, but now there are a lot that are around, maker spaces in a lot of schools and things like that people necessarily don't know about, but that a lot of them are there. One thing also that I'll say, if you think about it, your paper printer at home is technically a digital fabrication machine. We do digital fabrication all the time right now. You type something digitally on your computer, and you send it to your machine, your fabrication machine, which is your printer. It prints it out. You have it. You say, oh, I spelled that wrong. I'm editing my thing. And then I can say, okay, bet. Take it. I scrap that paper maybe, and I go print it again. I revise it digitally and fabricate it again. And once we can get to the point where but we don't think of it as technology, And this is, we're like, oh, wow, that's technology. But it's not really technology. It's just that we're not as familiar with it. If we can get to a society and get society to a point where this is as secondhand, as second nature, as even just a basic understanding, because I can't write a whole screenplay, but I can still type an essay or fill out something, because everyone, and these are tools that everybody can find uses for, just like everyone can find use for a paper printer. Once we get to that point, we're going to be in a position where there's a lot less waste, because there's a lot less shipping and stuff like that. And you're more about, hey, we have raw material and we have design just like your paper and stuff, and we'll be able to do a lot more things, a lot less waste, a lot more innovation, a lot less wait time, much less shipping, because it's not like I had to ship from somewhere. Hey, you have your thing, it ships from here. You know what I'm saying? It ships from, across the room, which is where we're trying to get to as a society.
And tomorrow, I think Deanna will get more into this when we talk about design thinking. A lot of times when you're doing design thinking, you are thinking about upfront, like, what are my constraints? And also, what are my circle of resources? What do I have that I do have access to? Somebody asked, what if I don't have ink? There was actually an interesting webinar series where a maker educator who I love, Nisha McRae, was showing how she was able to digitally fabricate. I think we were making cupcakes in 3D. And if you don't have a printer, she was using Inkscape. She was, holding up the paper to the screen, tracing the Inkscape, and then cutting it with a box cutter, and then, doing the layers. So she had done the layers in Tinkercad, but then was able to, or it was either Tinkercad or Inkscape, and then she was able to trace it and build it. So I think even on Monday, people were saying, how did you make the gas tanks using Tinkercad? And it's just like, I just worked with what I had, and I figured out how to, sometimes constraints give us a cleverness and a sense of creativity that maybe wouldn't have been there if we had all the resources that we wanted to begin with.
I have to jump off this call because I have another call.
Well, we so appreciate you, Jem, for sticking around. You totally have blown our minds and made us feel, I think, very inspired about not only designing, but also thinking about how we can make it real too. So thank you for making it real and keeping it real. And we look forward to seeing what you students make as a result of Jem's inspiration. So thank you so much.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Right, take care, Jem. And so we're gonna be signing off for now, but tomorrow, please join us again. Deanna and I are gonna be doing a presentation on design thinking. and also doing a demonstration of Tinkercad. So as an option for you as you're thinking about prototyping and bringing your design from mind into reality.